start. Okay, a little bit about me. My name is Bilal Ghafoor. I've been doing data protection and privacy work for about 15 years. Started out in the UK and then have been spreading in the last sort of 18 months or so. We've been working quite strongly in the GCC region. For some mysterious reason, still do not have any work at all in Kuwait, but otherwise, mashallah, we have compliance programs running in all of the other 5 GCC countries. So I have some privacy qualifications. I did the CIPE and the CIPM. Then I was awarded the FIP, and I did the ISO 27701, not the 27000, but this is the 2727701, which is the lead implementer for the privacy component that adds on to 27001. So that's an interesting one to be able to do. The first kind of topic when we are thinking about vendors is to try to figure out this whole problem around data controllers and data processors. That's kind of the first step, so that we're really, really clear as to what people's roles are. And those roles will be reflected in what the law tells us we have to do. So let's take this kind of very straightforward example. So if we have this example of a company wanting to use an HR software as a service platform, right? Very, very common thing. We've got lots and lots of staff to manage, and we need a piece of software. Most of the best pieces of software are usually software as a service. So the company starts looking, and it starts looking for vendors that it likes and services that it likes, and it finally decides, oh well, we've picked a service that we like, Acme HR software as a service. It's a fictional made up service. So let's try and work out who the controllers and processors are. Now, the data controller is the entity that decides what happens with personal data. All right, so that is the company that wants to commission this this platform. Looking for a suitable vendor is the procurement process. The platform itself is the data processor. It processes data on the instructions of the data controller. Now, how do you figure this out? Well, there are some clues that you can follow. These are not 100%, but these should be, if you sit back and think about it, then often this is the kind of detective work you can do to figure out who is the data controller and processor. And these should apply to kind of all of those relationships. Now, the first one is to decide, is to realize who decides what data to process. Can the data processor, can the software platform demand that certain kind of data are processed? No, it can't. The only people who will make that decision will be the data controller, the one who is commissioning the platform. So the data controller has to be that. They may decide, yes, we're going to use this software as a service. We're going to use it to manage our staff, but we will not use it to manage their absences. We might not use it to mention to process their payroll. We decide what we're going to do with it. Oh, for next of kin contacts, for emergency contacts, no, we don't want to do that. We're going to put that in a different system. It is the company that is the data controller because it decides what data to process. Who decides retention periods? Well, it is the company that will decide retention periods. It cannot be the platform. The platform has no right. They can decide we're going to keep job applications that come in, we're going to keep them for 6 months, or they could decide we're going to keep them for 2 years or 5 years. They could decide that. The platform does not get to decide that. Who decides who can have access? Well, it must be, so the company could say only people in HR have access. They could say, oh, no, we also want all the people who are line managers to have access to their direct reports. That is their decision. So it is the people who are making that decision that decide that are the data controller. If you get a data subject rights request, you get a subject access request, or you get a deletion request, you get anything like that, who makes the decision? Is it the platform? No. Clearly, it will be the company itself that makes that decision. What should be released? Should we not release? Should we even respond to it other than acknowledge it? That decision, again, that is the data controller. It is not the platform who has a relationship with the data subjects. Now, this is a bit misleading. If I ask a company to go out and run a survey for me, like a customer satisfaction survey, it will be the data processor that actually goes and approaches people. All right, so maybe they end up with this relationship. So that doesn't always work, but it is worth asking. The primary relationship in this case is the employees are the employees of the company. They're not the platform's employees. So that's where the primary relationship is. The last one is really, really interesting. Of course, in a commercial environment, a data processor will only process data for you if they're getting paid. All right. So if you ask yourself who is sending which party money, the person sending the money is usually the data controller, and the person receiving the money, the payment to provide services, is usually the data processor. All right. So all of these clues, and you can apply these rules to lots and lots of different kind of scenarios. And depending on what answers you get, you should be able to clarify who the data controller and processor is. Now, why does any of this matter? It matters because of this, because Article 8 of the PDPL says the controller shall only select processors providing the necessary guarantees to implement the law and the regulations. Now, look at this, necessary guarantees. So if you go into a shop and you buy a toaster or an oven, or you buy a car, you buy anything, you get a guarantee. You don't get a promise. You don't get a piece of paper saying, honestly, we made this really well. It's really good. It will work for a long time. You get a guarantee. And what does a guarantee mean? It means that if it breaks down, if your toaster breaks down in a couple of months, you can take it back and the shop has to exchange it, or they have to fix it. That is what a guarantee is. It's not a promise. If I say, I promise I'll come to you and visit you tomorrow afternoon, that's just a promise I can break. But if I give you a guarantee, that means that I must suffer some kind of penalty for not doing it. So that's a really serious matter. Like, that's a much, much, much more serious kind of promise. And the law says that you can only select a processor that provides the necessary guarantees. Now, why is this worth thinking about? It's worth thinking about because when you go and ask your data processor, hey, are you going to be doing all of this lawfully? And they say, why are you asking us? We're a really good company. Like, why are you asking all these questions? This is disrespectful. Then you can say, aha, but the law says that actually we can only work with a processor that provides the necessary guarantees. And so we must look into what you are doing. Article 8 also says that the controller should also monitor the compliance. Right? That means you can't one day get up and say, oh, this company is really, really good. This vendor is excellent. They're going to do this great work for us. And that's it, and never look at it ever again. It has to be monitored. You have to, on an ongoing basis, have a look at this. Ibrahim, put your hand up very briefly.
Sorry about that. Go ahead.
No, okay, no problem. So you can't just do one check and say everything is excellent. A lot of contracts might run for a year. They might run for 5 years. They might run for 10 years. And you can't just leave it go. You have to regularly go back and go, oh, are these people still compliant? Now, it also then says this shall not prejudice.
Bilal, I have a question,
yes, please. Yes.
Monitor here, does it mean the right to audit, or it's something different?
That's really interesting. We will come on to what that means. Now, in theory, you should have the power of audit. Practically speaking, if, for example, you look at Microsoft and you email them and say, hey, we want to come and audit you, do you think Microsoft is going to let you in the building? No.
No.
They're not going to let you in the building. Let's imagine you're working with a smaller supplier, and you say to them, "Hey, we're going to audit you. Do you have enough staff in your team to send them to Belgium for a week to go in and audit these people? Like, are you going to be able to do that?" Like, we will come on to this. You've asked a really, really important question. What does monitor mean? All right. And there are ways of monitoring people in a sensible, proportional way, but we will come on to that kind of towards the end of this session. But very, very, very important question. Now, the third bit is really, really important. It says, this shall not prejudice the controller's responsibilities. So what does that mean? It means that the fact that you have outsourced something does not mean, say, hey, nothing to do with me, another company is doing this, so they can just do it, and I don't have to worry about that data. You are still responsible. All right, the data controller is still responsible. So if a subject access request comes in from a member of the subject, who is responsible? Is it the platform? No, it's not the platform. The platform is there to help you answer. That's where the data might be stored. That's where you might want to retrieve it from. But it is the data controller. It is the company that remains responsible. If there is a breach, you can't say, hey, nothing to do with us. We gave all of our data to the HR platform. They had the breach, nothing to do with us. You are still responsible to the competent authority, and the competent authority is SDIA. All right, SDIA will come to you and say, well, hang on a sec, the breach happened with your HR platform, but you are accountable and you are responsible. So what happened? All right, so all you can do at that point is say, we looked into the company. They gave us evidence that they were very, very responsible. We regularly monitored them, and so we are victims of this as well. We are not the, you can ask us questions, but we are in turn going to then ask the platform, hey, why did you get breached? Or why did you do this bad non-compliant thing? All right, so you can't outsource your responsibilities. You can't outsource any of that. You will still be asked questions about this. Article 17 in the executive implementing regulations say that you have to have an agreement with the processor. You have to have a contract or something in writing. And it says that at minimum, it should have the purpose of the processing, what kind of personal data, so the categories. So, and the categories might be sensitive personal data and non-sensitive personal data, and it might be things like contact details, sickness details, might be payroll information, whatever it is. You should give some categories of data so they have an understanding to their possession. Duration of the processing, how long do you want us to do this for? So all contracts have a definite length. So my contract is valid for a month, or this license agreement is valid for a month. There has to be some kind of commitment. If there is a data breach, the processor has to notify the controller without undue delay. Now that's quite difficult. Usually into most contracts, I will write in, I want to be notified within 12 to 24 hours, because I then need to notify SDIA and I need time to do that. If your processor is abroad, now Saudi is, for example, a very important country, but it's a small country. So if you think about, for example, North America, if you think about the block of 27 countries in the European Union, those are geographically and in terms of population much, much bigger. So what happens is that most of the big firms, Google, AWS, Microsoft, pretty much every single decent sized company is usually situated outside of the kingdom. Some of them are localizing without a doubt. So Microsoft has said that it will start to localize in the kingdom sometime in early 2026, but at the moment it's outside. So if your data processor is sitting outside and they are following a different data protection law, you need to be able to clarify with them what is the contradiction. What will happen if if their notification period is a week and in Saudi it is shorter? What happens? What do you do then? Like, will they stick to the Saudi law or will they stick to the law of the country where they're in? So you've got to understand what those kind of differences are, because not all data protection laws are identical. So those are kind of some of the things that we are trying to fulfill, but let's try and figure out what a good vendor looks like. At the heart of what a good vendor is trust, right? And what is trust made up of? Well, you know, a good vendor will give you something at a good price. All right, there's no point. Like, so if a Microsoft license is for example $100, if it was $10,000, then this vendor is terrible because nobody can afford $10,000 for a Microsoft license, right? So price matters. Quality matters. Is the product good enough? Does it give us the functionality that we want? Is it easy to use? Can our people actually use it and get something out of it? So the best HR systems in the world are not the ones that are overly complicated. They're intuitive. People can actually drag and drop, or they can put things in and everyone can kind of use it quite happily. So quality matters. But the third bit, which is the bit where we as professionals worry about, is the compliance bit. So as data protection people, we don't really look at price. We don't really look at quality, like it would be nice if it worked well. What we look at is compliance. And the question is, how do you assess this trust? Well, you look at a company. Now, there is a big difference between contracting with Microsoft, which is a huge multi-billion-dollar company. And for example, there are lots of instances. I'm working with a really, really huge client, and what they wanted was they wanted to send these little gifts out to certain corporate people. And what they did is that there was a beautiful little print shop down the road run by a father and a son. This is in Dammam, in the business district. There's a little shop there. Father and son run it. They've got a 10-year-old computer, and they wanted to give them a list of all the people that they wanted to send these gifts out to, so that they could wrap them very, very beautifully and have them couriered there. Now, the very, very small shop, their finances are much, much smaller. Now, I'd probably be happy to say, please send this little commemorative gift to the chief executive of HSBC. I don't have a problem with that, because the chief executive of the HSBC name is in the public domain. What is the address? It's not the home address, it's the building address. I mean, there's nothing sensitive or interesting about this. But am I happy to put, for example, health data? If I was asking a very small local business to send out health data to people, would I be happy? Maybe I wouldn't be quite so happy about it, because if something goes wrong, it's just not big enough to pay us compensation or to manage the breach. So finances matter. The reputation of the company matters. Now, sometimes that's about going online and looking at reviews. Sometimes you just think, oh my God, this is so big. Of course, everybody uses it. There's no point looking for a review for Google. You know, some of them will be good, some of them will be bad. But at the end of the day, it's a huge, well-recognized kind of company. So reputation, to some extent, does matter. It matters whether they can provide you with insurance. The idea that people are insured, and so if something goes wrong, suddenly you don't have to go to the business and say, well, you'll have to close the business down in order to compensate us, that they carry the right kind of insurance. So those things kind of matter in the background. Obviously, security is a huge concern, and Saudi is pretty good at kind of security issues, in the sense that a lot of people got into ISO 27001 like 10 years ago. Wonderful, very, very, very good. But the thing that we are kind of now worried about in order to get to that trust is, are you compliant with the PDPL? And for us, that is like it's over a year old, but it's a relatively new idea, and vendors are still getting used to the idea that you would ask them questions about this. Like, you can ask them questions about their security. If you say to them, are your emails encrypted? They'll usually answer, because they've been asked this question for the last 10, 15 years. That's fine. If you ask them about PDPL compliance, some of them won't even have heard of it. Some of them that do are not really able to answer questions properly. So that becomes a little bit more challenging. Now, I kind of want to take you through a bad way of doing the whole thing. This is like a very, very, very common experience with how procurement and PDPL works. So a business unit wants a solution. It finds some alternatives. So it's looking for an HR platform. It looks at 2 or 3 and it goes, oh, these are quite good. The price is good. That one works really nicely. This one's got this feature. Yeah, we'll go for one of those. It's looked at the price and it goes, yeah, we'll pick this one, and it just buys a license for it. And the head of HR makes sure that everyone has a license. They do a quick training session. All the staff move on to it. They start migrating all of the data onto it. They start using it. And then at some point, usually by accident, the DPO hears about it. So the DPO then says, oh, can we look at this supplier and ask, can they be trusted? Are they compliant with the PDPL? Do they have all of these things? The DPO does some risk assessments, and then they find, oh no, there are some problems with this. Like the data is actually being stored in Vietnam, or there aren't proper access controls to make sure that only the right people can get hold of the data. Or we're looking at the company, and the company doesn't really seem to be very, very well established. Or it's missing a whole load of policies. We're putting our employee data into their hands. I want to know have they trained their staff? So there are some risks. The problem is the business unit at this point has already signed a 3-year contract. And so what often happens is people go, oh, what a shame, it's too late. We've already signed a 3-year contract. We can't get out of it. All of our staff are already trained. We'll think about it next time we do some procurement. And this is a really, really common thing that happens, and it's a terrible thing that happens. This is not how procurement or anything should be done. The way to do it is something like what I'm going to present to you. Now, this will seem very, very long, but if you start thinking about these bits of these processes, and I'll talk to you in a bit more detail about them, you can realize that a lot of this you can kind of slowly, over a period of time, make part of your procurement, and then this system works and flows really, really well. So the business wants a solution, and they will do some initial research on alternatives. They will like this platform and that platform. At this point, they should involve the DPO, and although I'm not going to talk about it in any detail, they should involve information security. They should say to the DPO, hey, we're thinking of procuring a program or a software as a service which will hold all of our staff data, their sickness, their bank details, their disciplinary, so really, really sensitive stuff. You don't want this stuff to leak out. You don't want this stuff to be mismanaged. Can you tell us what kind of things we should be thinking about even before we've picked a solution? And the same with information security. If you go up to information security and say, hey, I'm about to get a system that does all this terribly sensitive stuff, information security would be really happy to turn to you and say, hey, think about their security certifications. Think about, do they have these kind of policies? At least just look out for those 2 things. All right. And then we can do a deeper dive later on. So the DPO, you would explain the basic questions that you would ask potential vendors. All right. And then based on that, the business will shortlist vendors that achieve these basic requirements. So some of the requirements might well be, look, we're happy if they're hosting the data in the kingdom. That's one of our basic things. So if they're not hosting data in the kingdom, we don't want them. Or we're happy for them to host it outside the kingdom, but only say in Europe and North America. We will not deal with someone who's hosting data in Vietnam or in India, for example, or in Bangladesh, where data storage is very, very cheap. You just cannot think about doing any business with those. No matter what the price, what the quality, no. The answer is just going to be a no. All right. So the business shortlist vendors that do achieve some basic requirements. The DPO then sends out a due diligence questionnaire, and everything that's in blue I'm going to go into in a bit more detail, right, so that we get an idea as to what it is. The DPO then looks at risks and advises the business. All right, the business selects a vendor where risks can be managed. So it's not just price, it's not just quality, it's also this vendor has very, very high risks and we don't think we can manage them. This other vendor has some risks, but we think that they can be managed. All right, so as important as price, as important as quality is compliance. All right, so it will be a combination of all of those things, where that is how the final vendor, the final supplier will be selected. So the DPO then will look at any risks that there are, because no vendor is perfect, and they will mitigate those risks. They may say, well, look, we're not very clear on, for example, how long data is being retained for. It doesn't seem very easy to delete data from the system, but we know that eventually once staff leave us, and after maybe 10 years, we want to delete data. And so can you put into the contract something to say they will help us do this, so that we're not sitting there manually trying to delete data, which we know will never happen, right? So you start mitigating those risks by planning ahead. You'll have to think about international data transfers, if those are what are happening. You might have to look at a privacy impact assessment. You will certainly have to review the contract clauses and data processing agreement. You will have to update your RoPA. You may have to update your privacy notice. I mean, certainly in the case of staff, if you were used to running everything off of Excel and, OneDrive, which happens with very, very small organizations, and suddenly you're using some kind of software as a service, then suddenly your staff privacy notice will have to start saying to people, your data is being moved to this particular company, your data is being stored in so-and-so place, etc., etc. So you will have to update your privacy notice. And then, of course, regular monitoring by the DPO, which is something that we will certainly look at. But let's look at all the stuff in blue, and then we'll look at regular monitoring. You need to send out a due diligence question. Can I just have, by a show of hands, just raise hands, does who here has used due diligence questionnaires? Hands up, just raise your hand and then put it down if you have. 1, 2, 3 people. That's not a big percentage, so it is worth going into a little bit of detail as to what this is. Now, in the old days, you may remember, this is a very good way of thinking about it. In the old days, when the elders of the family used to arrange our marriages, they used to look at what is the family. They used to look at the boy or the girl. What do they do? What is their education? What kind of character do they have? Are they religious? Are they do they speak the truth? Are they angry people? Are they very accommodating? That's due diligence. Due diligence is literally looking at something and asking questions to see if it is fit for purpose. And in the same way in which, if you get married, or, when you buy a car, you don't just walk into a shop and say, yes, I'll have that one. You read about it. You figure out, is the fuel economy good? How does it work? How reliable is it? You do due diligence all the time. Due diligence for a company, some of this will be procurement. Some of you, if you're ISO 27001, there will be a requirement for you to do some due diligence. The due diligence for data protection, it doesn't have to be separate from those. You can merge it into the same kind of thing. But you do need to know company basics and financials. What is the legal name of the company? What is its address? Where is it headquartered? Wonderful. It has an office here in Riyadh. Great. But does it have is that where the headquarters are, or is that just an office? Who owns the company? How, what are its financials? Is it like a very, very small kind of semi-bankrupt company? Or is this like a flourishing big company? Let's go look at the company accounts, which are usually available online. If the company accounts aren't available online, it's very, very, very helpful that that a lot of companies are raising money through funding, and you get news reports. So-and-so company has just raised, $400 million in its latest funding round. That tells you if people are willing to put money into something, it is a good, solid business. You need to ask about data flows. Who are their data processors? What kind of storage do they have? Which of their staff can access stuff? What are their retention periods? You need to get into data geographies. Where is this data hosted? Where are the backups hosted? And if you are transferring data in and out of the kingdom, which is extremely common, then what are the transfer mechanisms, like the lawful transfer mechanism? If I'm sending data outside the country, how do I do that in terms of the PDPL? You know, I asked my supplier, how do you propose we do that? Ask them about their data breach history. How many data breaches have you had in the last 3 years that you have reported to a competent authority? Ask for their response plan. What is your data breach response plan? Send me the slide deck for how you've trained your staff. What percentage of your staff has been trained? Is it like 20%? I mean, generally for an HR platform, I, on the whole, won't really accept anything below around 98%. There's always 2% of people in a large company that are like busy, or more importantly, are either on sick leave or were on holiday and haven't quite caught up to it. But generally, absolutely critical that almost everybody has been trained. Staff vetting, you've employed staff. They're going to potentially have access to some of our data, just for security purposes, for the purposes of maintaining everything. What kind of vetting, what kind of background checks have you done on them? Have you trained them? I would like copies of your policies and procedures. Very, very typically, most organizations should have at least 15 to 20 policies and procedures. A data protection policy, a working from home policy, a bring your own device policy. These are all like very, very security led, but like policies on privacy impact assessments, on data protection training, all sorts of policies, and more importantly, procedures. See, a policy can be generated from ChatGPT. I can come off ChatGPT right now, and any of you can do this. Go into ChatGPT and say, write me a data protection policy. Bang, it'll write it out. It'll be done. Copy, paste it into Word, save. You've got a data protection policy, but it's useless. What matters are the procedures. Like when you are really looking at something, a policy says, this is what we want to do. Guidance or procedures tell you how to do it. Your policy may be, we want to uphold the PDPL, but your procedure, what is your procedure going to be? This is how you do it. This is the thing. If when you are when you are sending an email, these are the things that you should worry about. When you are collecting data, this is what a good privacy notice looks like. That's what guidance is. Of course, you will be interested in physical and IT security. It's wonderful that people have, their own servers and storage, but, how easy is it for somebody to break in? And then, of course, what are all of the IT and cybersecurity items that you are looking at? And then, of course, really critically, business continuity. It is no good me putting data into a software as a service platform if something is going to go wrong and the system is going to go down and be unrecoverable. I want a business continuity policy. And the bit that I am most interested in is, how long does it take you to resume service? Is it 4 hours? Is it 6 hours, 12 hours? What is it? And you need to know. Now, for HR, 6, 10, 12 hours, probably enough. Fantastic. If you're a hospital, having a 12-hour delay to being able to access patient records means that several people in the hospital are going to die. That's not good enough. You have to understand what your risk appetite is and look at the business continuity in that kind of way. As I said earlier, Saudi is very, very outward looking. In itself, at the moment, a relatively small country, and so a lot of big providers are outside of Saudi. So international data transfers are really, really common. So it is possible in Europe to run an entire business and never once transfer data outside of the European Union. That's really, really easy to do. It's very easy to run a business in North America and actually never ever transfer data outside. All right. In the kingdom, it's really hard to do this. Very, very hard to do this, because even things as basic as Microsoft, you're using Office 365, you're transferring data outside. So at the moment, what are your only kind of mechanisms for sending data out are the standard contract clauses. All right. Depending on what the processing is, you might need a transfer risk assessment. Now, either the vendor will sign your standard contract clauses. That will happen sometimes. If, however, you send your standard contract clauses to Microsoft and say, can you sign these? They won't even reply to your email. The other thing that could also happen is that you send it to a smaller vendor and they look at it and I had this. We were working with a mass emailing service headquartered in Paris, in France, and we sent them the SECs and they just wrote back and said, well, we appreciate that these are from your competent authority, but we don't understand them, and we can't find any lawyers that understand Saudi law well enough. And the ones that we have found, well, they're charging us like $5,000, but your entire license agreement is only worth $2,000. So why should we pay them? Like, we're not going to sign them. So it's very, very, very common that the other party will not sign standard contract clauses, not because they're too busy or too big, which often happens, but sometimes because they just don't understand them. They're new. Whereas because North America is quite big, but certainly the Europe is again, because it's quite a big block, if you decide that you are not going to understand and not going to sign European standard contract clauses, you're going to lose so much business that you're going to be stuck. So you're forced to sign them, and you're forced to find a lawyer, and you're forced to make sure that you're happy to sign them. But again, with Saudi, it becomes more difficult. All right. So if they don't sign, what are you going to do? I assume that you're going to have to accept the risk. Now, what are your other transfer mechanisms? You have adequacy and binding corporate rules. So adequacy is where SDIA is going to deem a certain number of countries to be adequate. It hasn't done it yet, so there are no adequate countries. Binding corporate rules are complicated and difficult and can only be used for internal transfers within a group of companies. And if you don't understand that, then don't worry about it, because it's probably not going to apply to you. Certainly, if you are going to send data, to a software as a service, an HR platform, no, they're not going to apply. So actually, you're kind of stuck with standard contract clauses, and you're kind of stuck in a position where they probably won't sign them, and then you're probably going to have to accept the risk. And that's a difficult place to be in, but that's kind of which every single data controller in Saudi is in that boat. You will have to think about privacy impact assessments. Now, to some organizations, these are still relatively new. All right. So you may have already done one for HR processing. If you've done one, you'll probably have to either update it. If you haven't done one, you'll have to do it. You'll have to assess and manage the risks. And then on a periodic basis, you'll have to update them if you are the DPO. You will have to provide contract clauses, so for the agreement. So there was a list of requirements from SDIA. But there, you should think about this in a kind of much broader way. You need to list the data controller and processor. You need to specify who can use what data for what purposes. Whether your data processor can share or disclose data to third parties, you need to control that. You need a list of their sub-processors. So, for example, the company uses Acme HR, but Acme HR is using Microsoft. So Microsoft then becomes a sub-processor. You want a list of sub-processors. There's no point putting your data into the hands of somewhere safe and reliable if they in turn are then going to be using companies that are, in countries where there is just no law, and your data will then be at risk and harmed. All right. So it's not just about whose hand are you putting it in, whose hands are they putting the data into. You should specify data subject rights. So if we get a data subject request, can I have a subject access request for all of this information? If it is easy for you to get it out of the system, fantastic. But if it is not, you might need the cooperation of your supplier to pull all of that data out. And you should have something in this, because they need to be able to do this pretty quickly so you can answer within 30 days. You need to, of course, have clauses around breaches and security. If there is a breach, will they tell you, if they're providing software as a service, can we please have an annual pen test of the system, and you send me the report showing what actions you're going to take? I want that report. I want to know that you are that your platform is safe and secure. I want to know about retention. How long are you going to keep this data, and how long are the backups there for? I want to keep control over all of that. And then, really importantly, what happens when we exit from the contract? You know, I don't want you anymore. I found a better provider. Can I say to you, I now need my data deleted? Like, what happens with all of that? All right. So you have to have arrangements for exit from the contract. You must update your RoPA and your privacy notice. So I've already touched on the privacy notice. So again, if you're doing something substantially different with people's data, you've got to inform them. You will have a RoPA, records of processing activities. They will probably have to be changed. Likely the destination, the country where you're processing this, your processor changes, all of that stuff. I don't think there's much more to be said about this. Now, finally, we come back to the topic that was raised at the beginning. Now, this is very, very, very important. Now, let's imagine you've done all of this incredible hard work. Everyone is sitting back sighing, oh, thank God, we've now found a compliant processor. We've done all of the work. This is great, right? The monitoring matters because things can change. Right, that is it. If you hear that the company has had a breach, if you hear that that it's been sold, if it's moved, if it's been taken over, then you need to start taking action. All right. You should also ask it for a list of its sub-processors on an annual basis, or if they publish a list of sub-processors, go and have a look at them. Right? For some systems, annual is enough, but for some systems, quarterly matters. I've worked on some projects which were hyper sensitive, and for there, the monitoring meant that on a monthly basis, very unusual. We don't normally do this. On a monthly basis, we used to send them a questionnaire asking them about what has changed. You know, have you had any breach reports? We couldn't wait a year to find out that they'd had a breach. You know, we sent them a monthly thing because it was that important. For a lot, I mean, to be honest, for 90% of stuff, usually an annual monitoring where you think about what were the questions I asked them, and to ask them, of this, what has changed? For some, it could be quarterly. It depends on what is the system, how risky is everything, and what is your own risk appetite. Now, most contracts have something in them around powers of audit. In practice, I have only ever seen this happen once. Right now, every contract will say we can come in and audit you, and the other side will usually just sign it because they know that if you had to come in and audit them, you're never going to be able to send a team of people over there, like some Secret Service agents to go and poke around everything. It's never going to happen. But audit does not mean that you physically go there. You should, if you are a data controller, you should write in powers of audit. All right, you should be able to at least go and ask them for questions. This means you can then demand documentation from them. Now, the one time when I did see a massive, in fact, I saw about 10 or 12 audits going on at the same time. I was working for a very, very large client in the UK. They had a very, very bad data breach, really bad. And the service they were providing was not the kind of service where people can just stop using them the next day. That's not possible. So what all their biggest clients did was they sent lawyers in to go and audit them because they themselves did not want to get into any trouble. And so we had several audits going on at the same time, which was an absolute nightmare. And in fact, that's why I was brought in. I was working for them because they called me and said, we are suddenly having like about a dozen audits and like we just don't have the capacity to answer all these people's questions. But in the contract, they have the power of audit. Can you come in and help us with this? And that's what I spent 3 months just answering audit questions. All right. So it doesn't happen very often, but you should, if you are a data controller, make sure that you write in a power of audit. That does not mean you turn up on the premises, even though it will allow you to do that. But what it might mean is you say, I want this document and you need to send it to me because we have the power of audit. You might ask them, and again, this is a really, really common question, ask them for updates on any data breaches they've had. You know, you should often write into something, just saying something like, you know, if you have a power of audit, you can just send them something on a half yearly, a yearly basis. Depends on your risk appetite. Again, it depends on the data. Sometimes you'll have to ask them on a monthly basis, what data breaches have you had and how serious are they? All right. If there are material changes in the processing, if, for example, you suddenly realize that they have moved, you know, they were based in Saudi, and they suddenly have got up and they've changed and they've outsourced everything to Venezuela, or you know, to some other country. You know, if there are material changes in what they're doing at that point, just go and ask them a question. All right. Now, a lot of the time you won't just hear about this. These are not topics that, you know, people chit chat and gossip about. It is usually asking for a review. What has changed? What has changed? Those are the questions that you need to ask. So, kind of in summary, I want to leave a few minutes for questions. So, as a DPO, you make sure that you look at the kind of procurement that's happening and say, you know, get the team that's procuring system to ask some basic questions of the vendor. So if it's very, very high risk, I want the data only to be stored in jurisdictions where I'm happy. So it might be GCC countries, it might be Europe, it might be North America, but I will not accept something that's sitting in India. All right. At base, I will not accept any supplier that is less than ISO 27001. All right. So basic, like 3 or 4 things where the people who are doing the buying and the choosing can get rid of vendors that don't comply with the absolute basics. So then sending this due diligence questionnaire to vendors. Most due diligence questionnaires, I mean, sometimes there are about 40 or 50 questions. I have seen questionnaires that are like 250 questions. They're long and they're complicated, but it depends again on what is the data, what is the risk. Once the DPO gets this back, you might look at these risks and you would advise the business. Sometimes the advice is, no, you just cannot work with these people. They're too risky. I will not sign it off. Sometimes to say, oh, this is quite difficult. It's going to take a while, but we think we can mitigate some of these risks. And then you will work on a program to mitigate those risks. You might say, look, this vendor is fantastic, and they're hosting all of their data in Cambodia. Don't like it. Like, go back to them and say to them, can you host locally, or can we do something on-prem? You know, like, what are the options that we have? And maybe one of the mitigations will be, they'll say, oh, I can't do that, but what we can do is that we work with somebody in the UAE and we can stick it into their data centers. You'll go, oh yeah, that's great, that's fine. Like, I'm completely cool with stuff being in the UAE. It's our next door neighbor, part of the GCC, trusted. We have worked out a compromise that works for everyone. You'll have to think about international data transfers and whatever transfer risk assessments are happening. You'll have to either create or update your privacy impact assessment. You'll have to provide those contract clauses and data processing agreements. You'll have to update your RoPA and your privacy notices, and then you'll have to work out how often to monitor them and what are the best ways. And again, when you're monitoring, the best way is, once you've done your due diligence questionnaire, to send it to them and say, what has substantially changed? That is kind of how you would do it. That's kind of it. So we are 2 people. Laura is my associate, but she couldn't make this. My name is Bilal Ghafoor. I'm very, very happy now